by the good graces of the great Ram. Good morrow and pleasant day. I am Brother Bob, and today I get to talk about nostalgia. The greedy brain parasite of yesteryear suckling upon the idea of a better time. At best, it's rose-tinted glasses with blinders that only help you remind the vague idea of the memory you once had. At worst, it's a head wrapped in a garbage bag in a back alley that's left to die. The Seventh Guest worms its way in somewhere in between those two ideologies. For me, it was a game that I revered since it was the first game that I had beaten without any aid. And on the other hand, there were some areas that might have aged like a fine wine turns to vinegar. Oh, we'll get to that later. The Seventh Guest starts setting up his rather simplistic plot. A man named Henry Stoff is a drifter. He's been shown killing people, including a slinky toy. And in his dreams he sees the vision of a doll and decides to follow these dreams instead of trying to better himself as a person, and makes the doll, which he inexplicably trades at a posh bar he happens to be at with fancy clothes, just dressed to the nines, and trades the doll he made for the bartender for room and board. Stoff now begins to see more and more visions of toys, dealing with some form of mental break, possibly from all the implied killings, that he promptly starts making, even though he's a vagrant and presumably has no workshop. Flash forward and we see that he has sold enough toys to afford himself a shop in town, and everyone is giddy to purchase a toy from him, until soon after several children who own the toys fall ill to a mysterious disease and die. In a move that exonerates him from any implicable offense, Stoff fucks off inside a large mansion that he's built on the edge of town, up a precarious path. The game starts with you inside the Stoff mansion as we have a short introduction of the main cast of spirits, dressed presumably in the very best that a thrift store could buy. We have Martine Boudin,
My, isn't this a cheery place?
Edward and Eleanor Knox,
Edward, I'm not sure we should have been here today.
Why? Because it's a spooky old house? Don't worry, dear. I'll watch out for you.
Julia Hine,
What? Don't. I expected more of Mr. Stuff.
Brian Dutton,
And Lord, it smells awful too. What's Stoff been doing here?
and finally, Hamilton Temple. When the player regains control, they remark that they don't know how they got there and that they can't remember a thing.
How did I get here? I remember nothing.
Pretty safe to assume that you're in a big old haunted domicile, and those stereotypes, well, they be...
Ghost!
So inferring that no information is given about the character you play as, I had to look the manual up on Steam, which I guess is a feature of the service. I didn't know that. The manual tells us that we play as the mysterious Ego, and now you have free reign of the open areas of the mansion. First thing that you'll notice is that the FMV, or full motion video, is in this game. Real actors are superimposed onto the game area. This low budget and low fidelity style of FMV really tweaks the old nostalgia nips. The rest of the area is pre-rendered, flat textured, and is reminiscent of the style that would dominate most adventure games for years to come. Speaking of which, the Seventh Guest has a rather unconventional style of gameplay for an adventure game. Foregoing the usual story-based adventure, stealing whatever isn't held down to mindlessly attempt to mash them together, hoping you happen to have the same amount of moon logic that the developer had. No, instead this game allows you to search the mansion at will, but only a certain amount of rooms will be open at one time. Most rooms contain a logic puzzle that you'll need to complete to receive more FMV cutscenes that'll move the story forward, and will also open more rooms in the house.
I'll show you mine, if you show me yours.
I don't know,
Oh, it says that we're each to have a piece. Exactly the same, including the symbols. What? That's impossible!
The first couple of these story cutscenes imply that each person has come to the house at the behest of Stoff, and if they find the eponymous seventh guest, one of their deepest desires will come to fruition. From the information that we've been given so far in this game, I'm curious about the desperation these people seem to have. If they were indeed given a letter from a man who made toys, some of which the kids got real dead real quick, and that is his only claim to fame, why would you ever think that they would have the power to give you anything you desire? That's the lesson, kid. And I can hear you saying, well, you joined a cult. Seems like a dumb idea to me. Well, they promised me a couple of things. A place to live, 3 square meals, a sense of purpose, healthcare benefits, and consensual sex acts are never looked down upon and sometimes encouraged. And you know what? I got exactly that within the first month. No complaints. They held up their part of the bargain. These stunned fucks happily walk into a sketchy death house for the most confusing reasons. The tale of the monkey's paw existed way before this guy's. Why do you think David Blaine sports those cold, dead, uncaring eyes?
I'd make up an idea in my head that if I didn't get there ahead of everybody, something awful was going to happen.
The only people that would realistically apply to this is the Knox couple that are deeply in debt. The other ones wanting such thing as real magic and to be young again are absolutely absurd, but I guess the point is that we're not really supposed to be rooting for anyone here in the first place. The bad people enter this mansion for nefarious reasons, and all the player can wish is that they get their comeuppance, Willy Wonka style. Weird character studies aside, the plot is very simple and more of a showpiece of technology at the time, since a CD-ROM drive was actually required to play this thing. This also probably accounts for 2 other things, like the great bongo forward Muzak, and the amount of random events that can be seen within the mansion.
This isn't real. Oh, no.
If you ever feel lost on what story beat you need to move to next, there's always a happy-looking ghost woman in white that will kind of lead you to the next area, beckoning you, giving her siren's call to the area next to the pantry, and that's when you realize that you haven't played this game in almost a quarter century. But a sweet and kind face of benevolence has guided you straight and true, so this must be the right and righteous path. Well, yes and no. Going this way makes me realize that I forgot to write down the map from an earlier area.
Oh, it's so beautiful. And oh, it's a maze. I remember doing something like this when I was a little girl. You have to follow it all the way to the center.
Since this is, in fact, a maze, I now found myself lost and alone, and I haven't saved for a while either, so I can backtrack to the last save or guess my way out. An hour later, I give up and find myself replaying a couple of puzzles and now writing down the pattern on the rug. The ghost beckons me once more, but she's a foul temptress, and if she was so hell-bent on showing me the way, I would have gotten out of this maze hours ago.
Piss off, ghost!
I won't spoil the ending since it has a twist, although it may be easy to discern where it goes. By and large, the story doesn't try to go far out of its way to be overly complex, and the ending reminds me of an old episode of Goosebumps or Are You Afraid of the Dark?
Who are you? What are you doing in my house? This isn't your house, Einstein. You're in cyberspace.
Maybe it's the infectious nostalgia worm boring its way deeper into the depths of my mind, but this style of PG horror really hits all the pleasure receptors in the old melon.
Crazy man.
The cheesy, often low-budget attempts at horror that make me think back to a time of running from house to house after the fire is set and the screams all die away. The puzzles are an eclectic mix, 22 in all, although the ideology behind some are replicated a couple of times over. Puzzles using only one type of chess piece come up more than once, and a variation or two on the slide puzzle make appearance as well. The biggest problem in these puzzles are an issue that come from the original format. The game has a bit of a self-indulgent streak. Visually at the time, the game looked fantastic, and the game made sure you knew that, languishing on these over-dramatic camera sweeps that made it more of a chore in the later half to navigate the house. There are shortcuts throughout the house that will help this, but the problem still lingers. Furthermore, the sound bites can become a touch grating. Restarting a puzzle that'll run you through all the voice lines that will halt the gameplay while the clip plays. This happens mostly after every action the player takes.
You'll need more than lenses to focus your thoughts on this one.
Puzzling. Some cannot be created more equal than others.
Finding things a little grating.
Add to this the slow animation of every move made, and some of the longer puzzles can feel like a slog only a few minutes in. The famished actor who plays Stoff does eat every scene he's in, and his hammy bravado really solidifies his place in this game.
Old Man Stauff built a house and filled it with his toys. 6 guests were invited one night. Their screams the only noise. Blood inside the library, blood right up the hall, dripping down the attic stairs. Hey, guests, try not to fall. Nobody came out that night. Not one was ever seen. But old man Stauff is waiting there. Crazy, sick, and mean.
The problem is the regularity in which he pops up and starts and stops the gameplay. And then there's the science lab. Since this game is a who's who of already overrepresented horror tropes, of course there's a lab. And in this lab is one of the game's worst puzzles. Well, not actually a puzzle, it's a minigame. One that makes me pine for the days of self-flagellation. The game is easy enough to understand. You have blue-colored microbes and the AI has green ones. With these, you have to gain control of the board, having the most microbes by the end. You accomplish this by gaining new microbes by separating yours into 2, flinging it 2 spaces over, and infecting the opponent's color when touched. The problem lies in movement and the better-than-good AI. You can move in 8 directions to split, thus creating new microbes, or you can fling by essentially skipping a space, or you can move like a knight in chess, like an L shape. This combined with the brutal AI and the horrific sound effects make this thing an absolute pain in the ass. The microbial sound of sucking is this game suckling at your soul, becoming stronger than ever before, creating an unkillable learning, thinking, living AI that will thrust us into a nuclear winter that this world has never seen. Now, that being said, there is a book in the library that you can go to once you fail a puzzle, and returning to it to read it through enough times after a hint is given will ostensibly pass the puzzle for you. You can do this with every puzzle in the game, except for the last puzzle. So technically you should never be stuck. Many have hypothesized that the reason the puzzle crushes your will to live is because when the game first came out, the game was attuned to the CPU clock speeds at the time, and if you had a Pentium system that far outshone the system specs, the AI would have a longer time to seek out the optimized placement for the microbes, using the extra power to think quickly, as it were. Also on the subject of oddities from the past, I pulled up the original trailer for the game, and it hints at a plot being much different.
The Seventh Guest, the breakthrough murder mystery game in 3D, combines the best of interactive gameplay with the dramatic illusions of filmmaking. When sinister toymaker Henry Stoff is mysteriously murdered, you and 6 guests are summoned to his vacant hilltop mansion to solve the riddle of his death.
Referencing a supposed dead Stoff, with the game acting itself out as more of a whodunit. It was also suggested that the game would have multiple endings, depending on which person was the winner, but the feature was ultimately cut. Overall, The Seventh Guest is a game rooted deeply in my past, a game where I would sneak off to the family room just to boot up the PC and try my hand at Stoff's infuriating house of questionable puzzles, a game that married the latest technology with the passing fad of full motion video, and although the results have probably aged worse for those who don't have the attached rose-tinted glasses, it's still a kitschy, good, fun time that won't run you very long, as long as you don't run out of patience.